We've had Atlanta, Daytona, and now Talladega here. 3 pretty damn good drafting track races. Very entertaining. A lot of passes, a lot of lead changes, and a damn good finish on all 3 of them. Well, would have been a great finish in Atlanta if the rain wouldn't have came into the Georgia area. But is the Super Speedway package fixed?
No.
All right. What's next?
No, it isn't. And the reason I say that is I know you said that you like to race a lot because there's a bunch of 3-wide racing. I'm trying to figure out how to say this. I'm
trying to figure out what you're trying to say.
So you couldn't. Track position's still king, and for a super speedway, that shouldn't really necessarily be the case. Now, if you're Dale Earnhardt Jr., one of those type of race car drivers at these super speedways, yeah, maybe you should be able to kind of dictate where lines go. But I miss the days of some of the best restrictor plate racing was I think back to 2017, the Ricky Stenhouse wins. I might be biased for that, but Ricky Stenhouse to win that Daytona race, I mean, he passed every car in the field twice, it felt like.
You mean the Talladega race?
Yeah, the Talladega race. I mean, he was in the back and came to the front.
Now, to be fair, it was a big old fucking wreck on the backstretch, like 16 to go.
Sure.
Chase Elliott flipped his dick off.
Sure. But, he was passing cars. He could get a run. He could, you could do that. And that's where I kind of long for those days where the top was the most dominant line for most of the day. Because if the top is the preferred line, you can get a run down the back straight and pass them through the corner, and make passes that way. When they're all wrapped around the bottom, and then the second groove is either the fastest or the second fastest groove, that top line's never going to work. Because, there's just too much momentum down at the bottom. I don't know if the cars have... well, I do. The cars have too much drag. That's the problem. The cars can't separate at all. And, it's just too difficult for them to get...
It goes back to they're too close together. They're too similar.
Yeah, the cars are too close together. They handle too well. If the cars handled a little worse, you could pass. So I think they need to take some downforce out of the car. I don't care if they increase horsepower, but they just need to take downforce out of the car. I think that's what they need to do. Now, like I said, I'm not saying it's a bad race, but if you're asking me what I would do to make the racing better, to where you could see passing throughout the field and not just the top 2 guys switching positions back and forth, that's what I'd do. I'd take the downforce out of the car and let these guys drive the cars instead of them just, full to 3/4 throttle, hold the bottom, and hope that nobody beside you wrecks. Because that's what they're doing. The first, 188 lap race? The first 160 laps of this race is running 1/4 throttle, 3/4 throttle, half throttle, making sure you save fuel so your pit stops are short, and hoping the guy beside you doesn't make a mistake. Unless you're in the playoffs, then you're trying to get some stage points. So that's why I'm not a huge fan of this Super Speedway package, is because it's promoting fuel saving during the race, which just...
Well, to be fair, they were doing that before the next gen. It was just harder to do.
Sure, you were, but you could... If you were 3/4 throttle to a half throttle, you're going to get passed.
That's fair.
Because you would lose that guy into the middle of the corner, the guy in front of you, and the guy behind you would dive into the corner and slide up in front of you. That's how Ricky made all those passes at Talladega. He would, he'd come up, he'd be running, he'd dive in, come up, side draft you, and drive by you. And, the side draft being non-existent in this car is one thing.
Yeah, I think I said at one point during the race when they almost wrecked, I forgot, it might have been a battle for top 5 or something where somebody got really close to somebody else quarter panel. I said, boy, if that's an old car, they fucking going around.
Yeah. So, like I said, I don't want to be like a Debbie Downer here because it was still a good race. And if they don't change the car, I'm not going to, which they're not going to, but when they don't change the car, I'm not going to be disappointed because it puts on a good enough race. But it's not fixed. It's still not perfect, and it never will be. We'll always complain as fans. We'll always complain. We'll always have something to nitpick on. But you know, if it was my decision, they'd have almost no downforce. Handling would matter, and it would be more like, you know, the Gen 6 era or the Gen 4 era of drafting, because, you know, that was where it was interesting, where you could have a car like Dale Earnhardt Jr. in 2001 in the July race at Daytona come from the back to the front in fucking 5 laps. That was interesting.
You had to drive the car.
Yeah, you had to drive the car. It was just who got lucky enough to be in the right position, which is all this is. It's just who is at the front when the last caution comes out. Now, in this race, that happened to be with 20 to go, and it was, you know, Ryan Blaney, the 36, the 4,
the 48, the 5, the 24, the 9, all the Hendrick cars.
All those guys were up there. They got lucky enough to be up there. But back in the day, it was, we want to be at the front, but, you know, you could win this race from 20th with 2 to go.
Yeah.
That's just not happening now. You can't do that. You can't pass. Unless you're, you know, top 4. If you're in the top 4, you can win the race from, you know, any point. You know, any point at that last lap, you could sneak your way through there. But unless they wreck, if you're not in the top 4, you're not going to
win. Yeah, I think I kind of agree with you. Obviously I like the race, you know, more than you did. But what are you doing? Get it out the freezer.
The freezer.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it was a great race, but I agree with Riley. It was you still got a lot of work to do with this package, just because, you know, fuel saving really helped that third lane. However it got there, I'm happy that you're still able to make that third line work. Artificially as it was still nice to see that third line actually work and get momentum and keep momentum there for a little bit. But obviously you saw at the end of the race that third line could never get going. Whether it was just people not being committed enough or just the 2 lines were just too dominant and they weren't saving fuel anymore. They were just going for broke. Whatever the case was, only the drivers know. We feel like it was just they were going for broke and they weren't lifting and saving fuel anymore, which probably is the case. But it's still these cars, like I said, are so similar. It's so hard to make passes come from the back to the front. Now, like I said, Denny Hamlin, he's one of the best out there in Super Speedways. I don't like him, but he is a hell of a race car driver, a hell of a Super Speedway racer. And he did a great job coming from the back to the front, finishing 4th at the end of the race. Made some great moves at the right times. They would get into the top 5 at the end of the race. So it's not impossible to come from the back to the front, but you have to have a lot of shit go your way. And back in the day, if you had a good enough car, if the right guy got with you, the right couple guys got with you, you could go up from 15th to the lead in 2 laps. Just it's not that case anymore. You just can't do that. So it still needs work. I think the cars are too close together. If you can get, like I said, less drag out of this car, that would help. Just more speed in general would help the cars. You know, we saw in qualifying, I think the max they were going in the down the straightaway was like 183, 184. Yes, that's fast. Don't get me wrong, but we'd see back 5-6 years ago they'd go 200. I don't know about 200, maybe like 194, 195. So you're talking about a 10-mile-an-hour difference. That's a lot in NASCAR and the super speedways. So more speed. I know it's more dangerous for the drivers, and I'm sure the drivers are not the biggest fans of the super speedways because of the close quarters racing, the big wrecks, and the possibility of a Ryan Preece flip. But we've seen this, like we said, when Ryan Preece flipped at Daytona. Whether you're going 180 miles an hour or 205 miles an hour or 120, you're still probably going to flip in that situation. So the flip might be a less aggressive flip if you're going slower, but you can't slow these cars down to 120 miles an hour. Nobody will fucking watch them. And, NASCAR, a lot of these, you get a lot of these TV ratings are so high for these Talladega, Daytona races because of the close quarter racing and the chances of a big wreck. There's a lot of casual NASCAR fans that watch only Daytona and Talladega every year because of the possibility of a big wreck. That's just part of it. Like a lot of football fans still to this day watch football because of the big hits. Not a lot of them, and to be fair, football has taken a lot of that shit out because of safety, and NASCAR has slowed these cars down because of safety. But it's still, the threat of it still being there is what intrigues the fans, whether the NASCAR drivers like it or not. So there's still room to grow for this next gen car for the Super Speedways. I thought it was a great race, even though it was probably artificially great for a lot of it because of the fuel strategy and the, trying to spend the least amount of time you can on pit road. But there still is room to improve. There's always room to improve, whether it's in safety, racing, always. Now, we've seen in the past, NASCAR take something that's great and fuck it up because they were trying to make it better. But when it comes to this case, Super Speedway racing in this next gen car, there still is a possibility to grow. But we have seen improvements from Daytona 500 last year to the fall Talladega race that we just watched this past weekend. So there has been improvements. It just needs to be more. I don't want to necessarily see what we saw before this next gen car with the 550 horsepower package when the guys just had stupid big runs and you have stupid blocks, cause big wrecks. You always have like 12 to 15 cars finish a race at the end of these races. I don't want that. And I don't want the 2015 package because it felt like there was a big old air bubble. You could never move in the pack unless you just had a stupid fast car. You got a lot of ways you can adjust this next gen car to make it better Super Speedways, but we have made improvement. We just need to keep going in that direction.
We'll see what they do. Like I said, I don't think they're going to change the car.
But like you said, what can they do? Less drag, more horsepower, which is very a possibility because everybody's saying it.
Well,
okay, you're more of a car guy than I am. What would more horsepower do to help the Super Speedway package?
Well, if you gave them more horsepower, but you didn't change the downforce and the way that the cars draft, it would be, in my opinion, you'd see the same exact racing. They would just be going faster. So I don't think it would change. If these cars were back to the, 700 horsepower, whatever it was that they were running at super speedways when they were restricted from 1,000. If they had 200, 300 more horsepower, they would just be faster. The runs would happen a little bit more. I think that the saving the fuel would be a little bit more difficult because, when you lift off the throttle, those guys behind you are going to have more of a run to you. So I don't know if that would help or hurt the outside line. I think the biggest issue right now is just the cars, just like everywhere, they've got too much grip. And they got too much downforce. Short tracks suck right now because the cars are gripped up. Super speedways are not great, in my opinion, because the cars just handle too well. And
well, to be fair, you said Atlanta was probably the best race you've ever seen.
And that's because they're going fast enough there, and the turns are tight enough that only the best cars are gripped up. Those cars that are, when we were there, the 17 and the 6 were the best cars.
The 12.
And the 12.
The 10.
All the Fords were the best cars.
Fords, yeah.
And they were fucking gripped up, right? Those other guys couldn't do what the Fords did. They had to lift in the middle of the corner. They had to move around a little bit, find grip. So if you had to do that, when you think back to your favorite Daytona, Talladega races, it was Daytona pre-pave, right? before they paved Daytona, where there was bumps and the cars had to handle. And
you saw the cars just bouncing in the middle of the corner.
Yeah. That's when you had great Daytona Talladega racing, was when the cars weren't fucking.
So what if they get them off the ground?
The problem with getting them off the ground is when they turn around, they're going to flip a lot easier because the air gets under them a lot easier.